Good evening. Welcome to the Essex County Ornithological Club's monthly meeting and speaker series. I am Constance Lapete. I am president of the ECOC. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you are as excited as I am about tonight's speaker. Tonight we're going to present Dr. Bernie Kraus, soundscape ecologist, musician, and author. He will share with us an intimate perspective on the history and development of the Great Animal Orchestra, an immersive exhibit currently at the Peabody Essex Museum. Dr. Krause's talk will begin just after this really quick ECOC meeting. Some housekeeping. We have a very large audience tonight, we expect, and so we are in webinar format. But I still do want to hear from you. If you've got any bird sightings or announcements, I'm going to ask you. If you're shy, you can put them in the chat. If you would like to be unmuted and tell us about it, we can do that for you. We'd like to hear from you. This is, after all, a club, and I really would like to see some other people out there. So please chime in. We're fortunate to be supported tonight by the expert audiovisual tech Chip Van Dyke. If you're having any technical difficulties, if you could try to reach Chip in the box, he'll put his email. Obviously that means that you've had some success getting on here, but maybe you can text your friends if they're having trouble getting on. So thank you, Chip. And as the talk goes on tonight, we will take questions at the end. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. And at the end of the talk, Dr. Krause will answer your questions. So on to announcements. We are quickly approaching the 122nd Christmas bird count season. For those of you who are not familiar with that, 122 or so years ago, somebody decided that it was a much better idea to count the birds than to see how many of them you could shoot. And I think that was a great idea. So this year that circles around Christmas, I think from December 14th to January 5th. It's a wonderful citizen science event. If you want to partake, you are in luck. The Cape Ann Count Circle is going to be held on Sunday, December 19th. And we can certainly use your help. If you're interested, please contact Robert Buxbaum. And I believe our secretary, Dave Brewster, will be putting his contact information in the chat box for you. If not, and you're interested, if you don't see that, please reach out to me and we'll get you involved. In other news, the ECOC Council has adopted a code of ethics. It's a code that helps us, excuse me, something just went beep. It's a code that helps us understand how we should behave towards birds and nature, but also how we should behave towards each other. Thank you to John Nelson and the Association of Massachusetts Birders Clubs for helping to bring these important issues to the fore. We've adopted language from the ABA. It's very similar to what some other clubs have adopted as well. You'll be seeing that on our website soon. We've also set up an email address that you can, hopefully you don't need to, but in the event that you need to report an ethics violation, there is an ECOC email that you can reach out to, and there'll be a point of contact that can help you out with that. So again, look for that on our website, coming soon. Finally, my last announcement, ECOC Members Night is coming up this next year on January 7th. It'll be at 7:30. We are looking forward to hearing from you. We have some talent in the club. I know there's more talent out there. And so if you are interested in maybe doing a reading, maybe telling us about a wonderful bird trip that you were on, and certainly if you've got any photos to share, we would love to share them with you and the rest of the club. So please reach out to Janie Winchell. She's our club vice president, and send in any photos that you want to share with a quick description. Attach the photos to the email. That'll make life a lot easier for us. And certainly if you want to have a presentation or read a poem, please reach out to Janie. And we'll get Janie's contact information in the chat box, or you can find it on our website, massbird.org/ECOC. We hope to hear from you. Does anyone else have any announcements that they'd like to share? You can put them in the chat box or ask to be unmuted. Don't be shy. I see that Robert Buxbaum's email is there now if you're interested. Oh, and Janie, thank you for putting your contact information in there as well for people interested in Members Night. Okay, I'm not seeing any more announcements, so you probably all are very excited for this talk to get going. So I'm going to move on. I'd like to hand you over to Mary Stevens for the Treasurer's Report. Mary?
Mute. There, now I'm unmuted. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I will make my usual plug short this time because I'm looking forward to this talk too. But if you have not sent your dues or speaker funds to support the ECOC, please do so. I'm about to hit enter and put my information into chat as well, so everyone can see that. Annual dues are $12 a person, $15 per household, or $200 for membership in perpetuity. So those are things to think about. We also accept donations for speakers, so please feel free. And we have more of those beautiful ECOC decals that you can put on your car window. Those are $1 each, so they make great Christmas presents, and wow, talk about stocking stuffers. Anyway, that is my spiel, so I hope to hear from some of you soon. I've heard from a lot of early birds already. More are always appreciated. So thank you very much. Enjoy the presentation.
Thank you so much, Mary. Yes, and as Mary said, if you enjoy speakers like we're bringing to you tonight, certainly, you know, they're worth every penny, and we'd appreciate any donations that you'd like to send in. That would help make this possible. Also, I just want to remind everybody that despite the rates that you heard and the cost of a sticker, this is 2021. We are holding steady on our prices. Now on to bird sightings, and please don't be shy. I haven't been able to get out to bird. Work has been crazy. I want to hear what everyone is seeing out there. So please put it in the chat box. Let us know. You need to share. Where's that wood stork? Anybody seen that wood stork lately? I see that Heidi Liedberg, sorry if I blew that, is seeing mergansers at Winter Island. It's getting to be that time of year, right? It's cold out there. Anybody else? You're making me think my computer's broken.
Am I okay to speak?
Yes, go for it.
Please do, Sissy.
I saw an adult female yellow-bellied sapsucker today in really ancient ornamental crabapple tree, which has many, many, many rows of holes in it from long ago, but it's the first time I've actually ever seen one here. I heard it before I saw it, so that was really great. It made my day.
Oh, wonderful. Was that right outside your front door?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it's out toward the back, the south field.
Okay, okay.
Where I have some bench and some chairs.
Don Paula is going to see you and raise you one.
Okay.
She's got a couple.
Well, actually, one I think has already been mentioned. The mergansers over at Winter Island are also down in Beverly Harbor. And we seem to have 2 or 3 continuing loons, which is nice. A flock of buffleheads, mixed males and females, and occasionally some black scoters.
Very nice. Dave Young is going to trump and say that he saw a Townsend solitaire at Halibut Point. And we're going to all be looking for coordinates on that one. Nice find, Dave. I bet you got great photos too. Anybody else want a dish? I know the competition is fierce out there, but come on, you got to share. I can say that I was sneaking around birding behind my cousins. My family doesn't really tolerate that sort of behavior, but So we were up at Halibut Point. I didn't get a Townsend solitaire, but I was kind of happy with a solitary vireo and a black guillemot. Okay, you guys are being really quiet. I think the motivation is to just get on to the speakers tonight. So I'm going to move on. And I'm going to ask Don Paul to present a book of the month tonight. Don?
So I actually have 2 books of the month, but I'll be really fast. And I got a nice lead in earlier about this being the holiday season. These are 2 books that would be good as gifts, I think, because they sort of would be interesting to a wide range of people. One is David Allen Sibley's What It's Like to Be a Bird. It's a book that's been around for a couple of years, has his color illustrations, but it's billed as From Flying to Nesting, Eating to Singing, What Birds Are Doing and Why. So this is a lot about the behavior of birds. It's not an identification guide. And there's a new book out this year by Jennifer Ackerman, who is neither a ornithologist nor a scientist, but she's a science and nature writer, and a very good one, very readable. And her book is somewhat similar. It's called The Bird Way, and it's a new look at how birds talk, work, play, parent, and think. So again, a book that's about, with some new research on how birds live their lives. And again, not an identification book. Now, I know usually I can show you the covers and I can show you the books, but as I was saying earlier, it's the gift season, and I don't have those books. So all I can do is just tell you about them. I'll put the names in the chat, and we'll move on from here.
Thank you so much, Don. I'm assuming they're just wrapped up and you don't want to unwrap them. That's what you were implying. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I always write down exactly what Don says so that I can go out and buy things. Thank you. And so without much further ado, here is Janie Winchell to introduce tonight's speaker. Janie is the ECOC Program Director and the Director of the Art and Nature Center of the Peabody Essex Museum. Janie?
Thank you, Constance. And I'm aware that we're a couple minutes before our official start time. So I'm just wondering if there's anyone else who might have an announcement or a special sighting, because I wouldn't want to be starting to introduce Bernie's program before we have, before our official start time.
Somebody must have seen some other birds out there. What y'all doing? Thank you. Don has put the names of both books in the chat. Don, we need to get your summaries on the website. Let's talk about that after.
Yeah, and I do have a copy of David Sibley's book, and it's a feast. It's really a wonderful reference, but it's just so much fun to go through. So I highly recommend that one, and I'm looking forward to seeing Jennifer Ackerman's reference as well.
Well, Dr. Krause says he has a hooded merganser in his pond, but he's in California, so that's okay. You know, we know there are birds outside of Essex County, and we're trying to expand our minds a little bit.
That's right. We are open-minded for sure. All right. Well, it's 7:43, so I'm going to go ahead, because by the time I've gotten through my intro, will certainly be well after 7:45. So my name is Janie Winchell. I am the Sarah Fraser Robbins Director of the Dottie Brown Art and Nature Center here at PEM, and I serve a dual role as the Vice President for the Essex County Ornithological Club. And so delighted to be here with all of you virtually, which is actually the only way we could make this program possible right now with Bernie, since he's out in California, as Constance pointed out. I really want to thank the generosity, or appreciate the generosity, of Tim and Joni Ingram, who gave a gift in memory of Dottie Brown, a beloved PEM trustee and longstanding member of ECOC, and also to support provided by the Lowell Institute. Without those, this event would not have been possible. And it is truly my distinct pleasure and privilege to be introducing tonight's presentation and its creator, Dr. Bernie Kraus, a musician, author, naturalist, soundscape ecologist, and original thinker who coined the terms geophony, biophony, anthropophony, as well as the proposed acoustic niche hypothesis. No moss grows on the stone of Bernie Kraus. As a pioneering soundscape ecologist, Dr. Krause contemplates the natural world as a poet might. He listens to animal vocalizations with a musician's ear and studies his field recordings from the perspective of a scientist. He has become a master in the art of revealing the beauty, diversity, and complexity of the languages of wild animals that are increasingly silenced by the din and intrusion of human activity. In 1968, after pursuing a successful career as a musician, including electronic music, Krause founded Wild Sanctuary, an organization dedicated to recording and archiving natural soundscapes. In the 1970s, he recorded soundscapes across North America, Latin America, Kenya, Rwanda, and Zimbabwe, as well as soundscapes from the world's ocean depths and coastlines. In recent years, he has returned to these specific sites, only to be dismayed by discovering that 50% of the recorded biodiversity has been lost. The Great Animal Orchestra, which is now on view at PEM, is a memorable immersive installation by Bernie Kraus and the United Visual Artists of London that makes a plea for preserving the wondrous diversity of the animal world. Krause implores us to listen to these voices from the living, non-human world before they are forever silenced. We are truly honored to be the first North American venue for this unique installation, commissioned by the Fondation Cartier in Paris in 2016. And though this installation has gone to venues in different parts of the world, it has not come to the shores of this continent yet before now. And it will be on view until May 22nd of 2022. In tonight's novel program, Krause has produced a nearly 40-minute sound-based recording and experience for us that's preceded by a short video. So make yourselves comfortable and be prepared to listen. After his pre-recorded program, Bernie Kraus will join us for a live Q&A. So please be ready with your questions, which you can share with us in the chat box or in the Q&A, or you can raise your virtual hand and we will unmute you so you can, actually, we think we decided it'd be best if we had people just do their shares through the chat and not try and unmute for a variety of reasons. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our AV tonight to start the presentation, and then we'll be joined by Bernie after that. Thanks so much.
My name is Bernie Kraus, and I'm a soundscape ecologist, a new field I help to introduce to the biological sciences and fine art. The Great Animal Orchestra art exhibit here at the Peabody Essex Museum brings into focus many aspects of natural sound that we're just beginning to realize. For the past 50 years, I've been recording the sounds of living organisms, large and small, marine and terrestrial. The Great Animal Orchestra is the culmination of that work. And the most important discovery is that these signals help us unlock some of the mysteries of both ancient and contemporary culture. For example, from these atavistic sources, we got our music, dance, and perhaps even language. The Great Animal Orchestra as a work of art sheds new light on these and many other discoveries, chronicles that in some ways touch every aspect of our lives. In the end, those biophonies are calling for our attention. And now, the real story behind this work. The thought of recording natural sound first occurred to me at a time when I was earning my living as a studio musician, having just introduced the synthesizer to pop music and film with my late music partner, Paul Beaver. After coming off a successfully charted synth album in 1968, Paul and I were offered a contract with Warner Brothers to do 3 more. For the first one, we decided to feature ecology as the theme, a new term that in the late 1960s had just entered the common lexicon. Called In a Wild Sanctuary, our album was the first to address that theme, and the first to incorporate natural soundscapes as a component of the orchestration. We had 2 problems to overcome. One, there were no natural sound libraries available for us to draw from. And 2, what natural sounds were available existed only in archives featuring individual bird, mammal, or amphibian recordings, examples compiled in the libraries of a few academic institutions that were using older field audio capture models. Because Paul and I were immersed in recording from a musical perspective, we were thinking more holistically, focused on the collection of correlated sounds from whole habitats, although we had no idea what we were doing since no one had ever tried that approach before. Paul was an indoor kind of dude. Wingtips were his shoes of choice, with soles that rarely, if ever, came in contact with a soft sand beach or high alpine trails on hikes taken through the Sierras. Double-breasted blue serge suits were his favorite covering, even on the hottest LA days. It was clear that Paul wasn't inclined to ferret out the recordings we needed. For me, having grown up in a home with parents terrified of the wild, my challenge stemmed from a deep irrational fear of the natural world, a family legacy. Yet, by default, the gathering of soundscapes for our album was left to me. I took on the mantle of that process as a rare opportunity to conquer my dread of the wild, one that had nearly incapacitated me. To begin that journey, I picked a nearby public park, imagining that it would be as close to wild as I could tolerate, and also my safest immediate option. I had no idea what I was doing or what to record in Muir Woods, that managed sequoia forest located just a few miles north of San Francisco. I knew almost nothing about natural habitats outside of recording studios. At that moment in my life, I would have been hard-pressed to distinguish the difference between a bird and an aardvark. As for field recording, in 1968, there was only one acceptable scientific protocol: going out with a parabolic dish and a monaural recorder and capturing life lists of individual birds and possibly a few mammal or frog species. Other than that, zilch. As for the recording of whole habitats, not a single mentor, written handbook, or helpful papers were there to guide me. With no one and no source to turn to, I was completely on my own and had to build my knowledge base from scratch. All of my sound work to that moment had been from an interior perspective. Studios or film sound stages, places mostly without windows or connections to the earthly world beyond. It had never crossed my mind that there was another domain that could offer so much gratification, so many thrilling encounters, so much splendor, and moreover, a welcome remedy for my lifelong affliction with ADHD. But feelings of insecurity, mostly unexpressed in the insulated childhood biome where I spent my early years, and in the places I would later work as a young adult, were freighted at that instant of recognition with a measure of uncertainty and trepidation. But by mid-afternoon on that fall day, the trajectory of my life had already changed. In the late 60s, most fall off-season weekdays in the park drew very few visitors. There were certainly none in sight where I set up to record. I was alone with no distractions, and as luck would have it, portable stereo tape recorders had just been introduced, and Paul and I had been given one of the early models to experiment with. And the impact this new tech had on that moment was, I'm certain, a contributing factor to my reaction. Standing by a small stream in the dappled shade of the redwood trees, listening to the soundscape through my earphones, I was immediately struck by an overwhelming impression of space, so unexpected and so emotionally powerful that it nearly brought me to tears. Nor was it completely quiet. True silence or no sound in the living world is rarely, if ever, encountered. A slight autumn breeze wafting through the forest canopy from the ocean just to the west, combined with a soft trickle of water from a nearby stream, made me feel calm for the first time that day. A pair of ravens passed overhead, the edge tones of their wing beats marking a course through the sky above as the birds soared off into the distance. Every acoustic element enhanced the vast dimensional illusion transmitted through my new headphones. There certainly was sound, but what was it about those particular resonances that caused such an intense effect unknown to me before? For one thing, the noises that always made me feel on edge and wary in the city were nearly inaudible, except for the remote traces of park construction off in the distance. Mostly, though, I had found within that soundscape a measure of tranquility, an unexpected reward from the field that I would pursue for the rest of my time on this planet. Recording in the woods that afternoon, the thought crossed my mind even then that wild sound might contain huge stores of valuable information just waiting to be discovered. But at that point in my life, I had no way of knowing that the natural world was filled with so much wondrous chatter. How would anyone know? No one I knew was listening, and many of us don't distinguish between the acts of listening and hearing. It's one thing to hear passively, but quite another to be able to listen fully and to be actively receptive. The journey has not been without dismissal. When I was a young lad still thinking about forging a career as a professional musician with guitar as my major instrument, I applied to Juilliard, Eastman School of Music, New England Conservatory, and the music department at the University of Michigan in 1955. But when I went for my auditions, I was told everywhere that guitar was not a musical instrument. Footnote: it wasn't until 1962 that guitar was introduced into U.S. academia at Berklee College of Music in Boston. And when I first instituted spectrograms and described the niche hypothesis as a measure of habitat health to the head of the California Academy of Sciences Birds and Mammals Department in 1983, I was told to focus more on single species, and that other than individual bird vocalizations, there was no other useful information to be read from spectrogram detail of entire soundscapes. When the late Stuart Gage and I tried to introduce the concept of biophony to the National Park Service at a soundscape meeting in Fort Collins in the early 2000s, we were told by the head of park research that we couldn't introduce a new word to science. No kidding. In fact, in 2004, two conservative lawmakers serving on the Budget Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives threatened to defund the National Park Service Natural Soundscape Program, a program I helped to establish, if the park administration didn't remove the term soundscape. They claimed that the term was too radical. No kidding again. The Park Service was forced to change the name of the division to the Natural Sounds Program, a name that still exists. And when I tried to introduce the concept of biophony to an exhibit on natural sound and music funded by the National Science Foundation in the early 2000s, I was told that because the term wasn't to be found in Wikipedia, it would not be included. This is a new subject, and if you're aspiring to a career in the earth sciences, just keep in mind that the observations you try to describe with regard to wild events won't go unchallenged for any of you either. But to counter those objections, just remember Nietzsche's aphorism, "Who speaks of victory, to to endure is everything. This journey has not been without loss, the loss of colleagues and friends to accidents while in the field, to disease, to just plain worn-out bodies. Then there was the firestorm of October 2017 that destroyed everything my dear wife Catherine and I had, and very nearly us as well. More on that in a few minutes, but fortunately, 6 months before that event, a complete copy of my archive had been sent to the Fondation Cartier in Paris for safekeeping. So my life's work is intact and thriving, much of it thankfully featured here as part of the Great Animal Orchestra. So far, I've mentioned the soundscape a few times without defining what it is. The soundscape is all the sound that reaches our ears from whatever source. Sounds pretty radical, right? And it just happens to be made up of 3 basic sources. The first is the geophony. Geo, the Greek prefix for earth, and phone, P-H-O-N, the suffix for sound. It refers to all of the non-biological natural sound that occurs in the wild. For example, the sounds of wind in the trees or grasses, water in the stream, waves at the ocean shore, a rainstorm with thunder, an avalanche, an earthquake, movement of the earth, or a wildfire. Geophonies were the first sounds produced on Earth and date back some 450 billion years to the formation of the planet. But there was nothing to hear these early sounds until the second category evolved, the biophony. Again, bio picking up on the Greek prefix for life, followed by the suffix phone again, the sounds of living organisms. By biophony, I more often refer to the collective sounds produced by all organisms in a given habitat at one point in time. And finally, there's the racket we humans produce. I call it anthropophony. Anthropo means human, think anthropology or anthropogenic. This class of sound is split into 2 subcategories, controlled sound like music, theater, and language, and chaotic or incoherent sound that I refer to as noise. Things like the traffic noise of large cities, an aircraft flying overhead, the roar of a passing motorcycle, sound that's produced by technology or technophonic, or even 2 people having a loud argument that you don't want to hear. So what have we brought in this exhibit, and what is the reason behind this particular work of art? I'll begin with the second question. For years, I spent time in the field recording these biophonies, learning what I could from the signals, especially what they conveyed and how the world of natural sound in general worked. Given all of the individual species collections, the pressure brought to bear from older colleagues to stick to that one narrow track in which they were so heavily invested, and the energy devoted to capturing a tiny, distorted abstract of the acoustic world in such a limited way, convinced me that something was missing, some important link where the forest wasn't really being heard for the trees. For example, how can one ever begin to understand how a bird sings or calls in a particular habitat if its voice is not being considered in relationship to all the other sounds there? Like I mentioned in my TED Talk, it's a little like trying to understand the magnificence of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony by abstracting the sound of a single violin player from the orchestra and hearing just that one part. Or the kicker here is with all the cutting-edge software now available, researchers have the best of both worlds. On the one hand, they can record the whole habitat, while on the other, the software exists so that anyone can extract the single bird voice they want to hear, all without ever losing context. Think Adobe Photoshop for sound. Actually, this software is called Adobe Audition. With that new technology, you begin to hear and see and gain new perspectives on why birds are singing and calling in the ways that they do. Same with insects, amphibians, and mammals that occupy unique bioacoustic spectra within that habitat. And here are some of the wondrous things that those biophonic narratives are telling us. If you listen very carefully, you'll hear in the context of every biophonic statement, especially older healthy habitats, the expressions of melody and rhythm and the organization of sound. Birds typically provide the melodic solos, frogs and insects the rhythm section. And when all species in a given habitat generate sounds together, you've got your proto-orchestra, ensembles that we humans imitated as early choirs when we lived much more closely connected to the natural world. If I'm thinking about writing music, whether it's a pop piece or a symphony, I usually don't turn to the self-referential echo of our own limitations, what we call music, for inspiration. I will almost always gravitate to the Great Animal Orchestra as my muse. It's where our music, dance, and most likely language came from in the first place. And there is no greater resource. For those musicians listening to this, that resource is for all practical purposes infinite. But that's not all these soundscapes are telling us. If you want to know how healthy a habitat is, just look at the spectrogram of its biophony. The distinctive ways in which all of the voices are structured on the page will tell you everything you need to know. As the field of resource management progresses, these bioacoustic images will become more and more seminal to the decisions that managers make. And remember, if the habitat you're looking at proves to be in a healthy state, as indicated by its voices and the frequency niches each species' voice inhabits, it's probably healthy for you too. Keep in mind that when you're under the weather, it shows in your voice. And it's the same with the voice of the natural world. It's biophony. Well, what else can be gleaned from listening to these biophonies? How about a sense of place? The biophony from each healthy habitat is distinctive, just like your voice is different from mine. When you speak, your pattern of speech is usually a giveaway as to what region of the country you come from. Habitats, too, have their own kind of accent. Given the season of year, day or night, the collective sound of that environment will be like no other anywhere on the planet. The 10-acre oak chaparral forest that surrounded our wild sanctuary home in Northern California sounded like no other spot on Earth. Where we live now has its own rural soundscape texture, but it's different. Since the 2017 fire event, we're climate migrants, a new experience in our life's journey, signified prominently by changes in the voices of otherwise familiar landscapes. The power of biophonies goes on, informing subjects too numerous to fully engage here. Anyway, I want to get back to the first question asked earlier. What have we created here? As a scientist working part-time in the academic community, my options for expressing my findings are fairly limited. I can give a talk at a conference, write an academic paper, publish data to be analyzed, teach a course either in the field or in a classroom, and that's about it. If I write a scientific paper and get it published in some scientific journal, on average, maybe a couple of dozen colleagues will opt to read it. If it's groundbreaking new science, perhaps several dozen more. However, if I take the time to transform my data into works of sound art, as I have here, the outcome changes. If it's a decent piece, it will tend to have a wider impact by reaching more people. Aside from its 2016 Paris premiere at the Fondation Cartier, the Great Animal Orchestra has been shown in 2 other European and 2 Asian venues and heard by over 1 million people. And trust me, given the rate at which we're losing wildlife and wild lands, time is not on our side in an effort to reach as many people as we can with these appeals for responsible action. Through art media, as long as the result remains credible, we're a bit more free to say things spiced up with a bit of emotion. Otherwise, with peer-reviewed science, it's an area of serious self-restraint. You don't want to be accused of being anthropomorphic, although I constantly have to reassure my colleagues that, like them, my morph is definitely anthropophic. My idea of art is to create performances of wonder I most want others to hear and see manifest in the world. Which brings me to the Fondation Cartier and their contribution toward this work. In 2014, after my book, The Great Animal Orchestra, was published in French, the amazing French anthropologist Krause, who has been living and working with the Yanomami tribe in northern Brazil for many years, introduced my book to his friend and colleague, Hervé Chandez, director of the Fondation Cartier. Shortly after reading it, the director called to ask if I would be willing to conform some of the ideas into a large installation featuring acoustic art. At that point, I invited director Chandez to join me at Wild Sanctuary in California to review some of the potential material. He obliged, and we spent a week together auditioning various wild habitats represented in my archive. Eventually, Hervé Chandez and I chose several soundscapes from threatened habitats for me to develop. 2 of them are from tropical rainforests, 2 of them from temperate habitats, 1 from the Arctic, 1 from a subtropical area, and finally, an ocean environment. On one of my planning trips to the Fondation in Paris, I was introduced to Matt Clark from United Visual Artists in London. It was the Fondation's idea to have us collaborate. I had no expertise when it came to delivering streaming images of sound in large format venues. But Matt and his UVA group immediately understood the huge scope envisioned by the Fondation team. Working together with UVA, we were able to transform from what in my mind had been a very limited vision to one much larger, more engaging, and magical. It's not an easy task to convert audio media into streaming graphics, but UVA realized a concept and scope that had never been done before with this medium, where image supports the sound on a grand scale. Ultimately, every element coalesced. The first thing that visitors experience in the darkened theater-like space that's been created for this event are the soundscapes in 7.1 theatrical surround. So no matter where one sits or stands, they'll be in a sweet spot engaged with full surround effect. With UVA's contribution, these biophonies in turn are supported by real-time spectrograms. Visitors experience the piece as a mesmerizing video, an acoustic experience similar to a fine musical encounter, compelling and enchanting. That's partly because the performance alters the visitor's sense of time. The 90-minute presentation feels more like 10 or 20, a powerful and visceral event. In this work, I'm primarily a conduit, letting the voice of the natural world speak for itself without much interpretation. As both a scientist and artist, I hear those life-affirming voices, individually and collectively, as screaming out to us, begging for a strong dose of compassion, for understanding based on a level of environmental literacy we must acquire if we're to act collaboratively, mitigating the harmful path on which we now find ourselves. It's one that's rife with devastating impacts, such as those my wife and I have encountered. In 2017, my wife and I lost everything in the Northern California fires. Gone was our home, Wild Sanctuary, where we had lived and worked for over 25 years. Destroyed were all the detailed field journals going back half a century, slides and photos of work in the field, reference books, nearly 70 years of historic correspondence, the awesome-sounding Manuke Papazian guitar that I'd played at Carnegie Hall as a member of the Weavers, fine art, clothing, furniture. The intensity of the inferno was so great that even the refrigerator, stove, and the engine block of Catherine's car melted into unrecognizable puddles of stainless steel and aluminum. Not one single item that we had amassed over the arc of our lives survived. With no warning from first responders, county or law enforcement agencies, We were mercifully awake at 2:30 in the morning on the 9th of October when the hillside outside our front door suddenly burst into flame, and Catherine and I fled wild sanctuary for the last time. Catherine, who had just returned home from a surgical procedure, needed assistance getting into the car. The fire was so intense and aggressive that we had no time to retrieve any of our personal items, computers, iPhones, glasses, or medical aids for Catherine's recovery. During our dicey pre-dawn flight with only the clothes we wore, we came face to face with a malevolent eye of global heating and its horrific consequences as we bolted through the wall of fire that had enveloped our driveway, our sole one-lane path to whatever life now remains to us. As we raced toward the car, a fire tornado seethed with a voice of rage. It was the kind of ferocity I've never heard before and hope to never hear again. The combined sucking roar of wind and blistering heat, signified by a fierce expirational crackling surge and punctuated by the neighbors' propane tanks exploding everywhere around us. The intensity of the inferno was a humbling reminder of the feral power and the absolute certainty that natural forces will always triumph in the end. That sound haunts us to this day. I rarely make it through the night without awakening to a frightful sonic nightmare. A windstorm of historic magnitude, with gusts exceeding those of a Category 1 hurricane, began at sundown on Sunday, October 8th. As it intensified, it blew many trees insufficiently trimmed and already desiccated from the California drought that had begun in 2011, and it blew them into adjacent power lines. Ignited by contact with shorting wires and arcing transformers, the branches flared up everywhere, all at once, and in so many areas that first responders were completely besieged. Where trees didn't hit electrified wires, the velocity of the wind carried the blazing embers sometimes a mile or more to the south and west, where they set alight other wooded areas and many structures. By week's end, a third of our small village was reduced to ash. A combined 390 square miles were incinerated, an area nearly 8 times the size of San Francisco. In a matter of a dozen days, the fires caused many deaths and displaced nearly 100,000 people. Many more have suffered in the times since. Apart from our own lives, my natural sound archive, the core of a lifetime of devoted work, miraculously survived. The heart of the collection, an eloquent narrative of living organisms expressed through the numerous biophonies present in the recordings, some of which are being shown in this art piece, is still there to be explored by students of environmental sciences and rendered into creations in the field of music, dance, theater, museum exhibitry, and contemporary art installations. But central to the value of the library were all of the original analog tapes of music and biophonic field recordings, first-generation digital audio tapes, original slides and career photos, those detailed field journals I was talking about earlier, early recording technology and transitional gear from analog to digital. All of that stuff was destroyed. Many of those things, of course, cannot be replaced. Fortunately, I had made 5 separate digital backups of this rare compendium of field recordings, marine and terrestrial, that I began amassing in the late 1960s. In addition to the original analog master tapes of music and soundscapes, 3 of the 5 copies of the archive were destroyed that morning. Of the 2 that endured, one had been stored at the Fondation Cartier in Paris, a protective rejoinder to the last American political administration's bewildering denial and unrivaled suppression of climate and ecological scientific research. The other copy had been deposited in a nearby bank. As a practical matter, we understood rationally that certain things could be replaced. Yet the fire was emotionally traumatic, and it is still devastating, especially the loss of objects that were so deeply personal and unique to each of us individually and collectively. In some inexplicable way, these were the possessions that helped to define us. Even though we know everything is gone, we're still faced with a sense of cognitive dissonance when our minds default to questions like, where are the familiar objects we turn to as reminders of who we are in order to help us recover? Mementos of family still here or gone, amazing places we've visited or studied, of those whose paths we've crossed. How can we ever again allow ourselves to feel as connected to another place when the biome we had so lovingly tended and perfectly calibrated for our remaining years was taken that effortlessly? Reflecting for a moment, I think back on what I miss most about Wild Sanctuary, the name we gave to the undeveloped 10 acres of hilly oak chaparral that until the firestorm had been our shrine-like haven for the past quarter century. It was and remains today a lovely isolated rural spot, not far from Jack London's Wolf House and Ranch, where in clear weather the illumination of our sight came mostly from the sun, the moon, and the stars, with very little light pollution from more densely populated areas to our south. On cloudless nights, the spectacle of the Milky Way was almost always visible. Wild Sanctuary was a place where we were greeted every day with the numinous voices that arose from various blends of 32 species of birds, a family of foxes, one of bobcats, several coyotes, reptiles, amphibians, lots of insects, and even a mountain lion that occasionally visited us, all making their sonic presence known from time to time. What made our home sacred was a serene consonance of the seasonal cycles, moments heightened by the captivating biophonies that arose from our tiny oak woodland. Coming home from long field trips abroad, the site always welcomed us with a feeling that we had returned to hallowed territory. With all that stuff gone now, the tranquil soundscape that once existed remains the feature that we miss the most. It too is gone. Over 70% of the vegetation that graced our property was burnt beyond recovery. I suppose it's a detail that we'll be dealing with for the rest of our lives. After all, it was from the voice of our special animal orchestra that we knew the time of day or marked the progressive phases of the seasons. For messages inherent in those distinctive narratives, we became intimately familiar with the many aspects of that small bit of earth that we affectionately occupied. Until the fire, the quality of the soundscape was always embracing, healing, and reassuring, a subsequent effect of the collective sound produced within our modest but mostly healthy environment. In a word, even at the height of the 7-year historic Northern California drought that began in 2011, hearing the diminished biophonic expression of Wild Sanctuary made us feel safe in the living world, a place where we had always strived to connect. In those lovely enchanted hours, we had become genuinely optimistic. Natural sound was always nearby to enrich our lives. Now, something is missing. Wild Sanctuary is eerily quiet. With the loss of that voice, our sense of well-being has palpably suffered as we've moved tentatively and with little choice into a future of unfamiliar and uncertain diasporas. I can now understand that I can no longer ask why hurricanes or wildfires have become more damaging, or why viruses are mysteriously killing millions of organisms, human and other, worldwide, or why whales can't hear each other, or why fisheries are depleted, or why the ocean levels are rising, or why the ice sheets of Greenland or the Beaufort Sea are melting at historic rates. I can no longer ask why my thoughts or prayers are powerless and meaningless and indeed arrogant in the face of how radically we've transformed the source of our lives with our raging ambition. If you're looking for answers, The conundrum is not so much what we choose to do. It's what we choose not to do. Pick any natural habitat on the planet and act toward it in ways that will allow it to prosper. And if it is to thrive, it's my guess that you'll need to make some changes in your life. Trust me, they'll be worth the effort. The alternative is a kind of silence that is too overwhelming to contemplate. This exhibit is an homage to what survives of this collection, its durability, its rich and wondrous voices, and the extraordinary organisms from which it all sprang. It is an expression of love and of our unending appreciation for the continued support from groups like the Fondation Cartier and venues such as this. So I convey to you the proto-music of 7 habitats, where each composite delivers a narration of place, a sense of its vigor, and its implications for the rest of the life-affirming world. The message is a final plea from the thriving bounty around us. It's a summons for humans to cool it before it's too late. Pay attention. All of the remedies are there. To find them, all you need to do is listen. Go now. You've got what you need. I think you are ready.
Well, I know Bernie and Constance will be joining me here momentarily. There's Constance, and I'm sure Bernie, you're out there too.
Hello.
Hey, welcome. Welcome in person now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for, I don't know that there's anyone who does a storytelling better than you, Bernie, of your life and the science and sort of weaving it all together. You've had a remarkable journey.
Yeah, it's been great fun. It's been great fun. And I've met some incredible organisms along the way, people included.
That's right. I was going to say both human and non-human, right?
Yeah.
I had a question, and I hope people will start feeding things in. It was not the kind of presentation that you wanted to be generating questions. I feel like you just wanted to be immersed in your life experience. But I'm curious how you feel the experience that you've just gone through, a truly life-altering event, how that's influenced your feeling about or your experience of this installation of the Great Animal Orchestra that you created before this all happened. How has it changed your view or your thoughts about it?
Well, I certainly understood to some extent the sense of loss, because so much is lost with this archive. In other words, a lot of it has disappeared. A lot of these habitats have disappeared. We're not talking about single individual birds. We're talking about whole habitats that are gone now. And it never struck us, I think, that we would lose ours. But we're just a singular couple in an earth-shaking and earth-shifting event that's occurring right now, where so many people are migrants. At least we have some resources, and we're able to reestablish ourselves in some way with a place to live and so on. But we've moved 8 times in 2 years. And that has a big impact on us and how we feel about the world and how we feel about this piece. So this piece has taken on different meaning to us now.
Mm.
And it's, we just appreciate even more a sense of life and these life-affirming organisms that are trying to tell us, we got to cool it.
Yeah. And another thing I was hoping that you could speak a little bit to that concept of the proto-orchestra and what it was that you experienced that first led you to recognize that there was something grander going on than the individual species isolated or kind of just jumbled, but that it really, there was a kind of organization to it.
Well, what happened was I was in Kenya. I was working for the California Academy of Sciences on assignment right after I got my doctorate in 1981. And I was lying there one night and just heard, I'd been working for like 30 hours straight and was very tired. And I was kind of in this kind of, half awake state. And I was listening through my earphones. I was listening to the soundscape through my earphones. And it occurred to me, just in kind of a flash, that these sounds were organized somehow. And I was thinking compositionally in terms of sound, and I could hear the sounds organized from the very lowest with the elephants to the very highest, that were the low-sounding bats. And it just, I just kind of made a note of it. And when I got back to San Francisco and I looked at the spectrograms, sure enough, it looked like it looked like a score by Boulez and the French composer. And it just struck me as being something that I needed to look further into. Now, I was working at the California Academy of Sciences with a fellow by the name of Luis Baptista. Luis Baptista is very famous for his work with the white-crowned sparrow. And he found that the white-crowned sparrow had these different dialects no matter where it was. And I said to Luis at one point, I said, Luis, I'm thinking that maybe these sparrows are responding to if you want to know why birds sing, these sparrows are responding to the habitat around them and the soundscape of the habitat. And he says, no, that's not happening. You can forget it. You can go on to, if you want somebody else to work with, you can work with somebody else. I mean, it got to that. And I said, well, we're not going to do that. I said, but come on outside with me. I want to show you something. And he had been able to imitate. There are these four corners of the Academy of Sciences in Golden Gate Park, which is where his office was. And he was recording the different sounds of these birds at each of the four corners. And I said to Luis, we're going to do two things. We're going to, first of all, record the habitat absent the white-crowned sparrows. And then we're going to record the habitat with the sparrows, and we're going to compare and see why they're vocalizing the way they're vocalizing. And sure enough, I was able to record the different soundscapes, the anthropophony, the ways in which sound, with all the traffic in airplanes and everything else, affected each of those habitats. And sure enough, when we looked at the spectrograms, and they were primitive then, this was the late 1980s, the birds, were finding acoustic bandwidth in which their voices could be heard without expending a lot of extra energy. And it was just around the year 2000 that Luis finally said, okay, let's publish together. And then he died. He had a heart attack raking leaves in his driveway one afternoon, and that was the end of it. And that was, but that's okay. I mean, these things happen. And that was, that's sort of the story with the white-crowned sparrows.
Wow. Yes, such a different way of looking and as you're so often emphasizing, listening with a different perspective on what might be happening instead of just applying what we have known or what we've imagined.
Well, there's a whole history behind that. Of course, in 1889, a fellow by the name of Ludwig Koch, K-O-C-H, a German fellow, at 8 years old, his father had given him a wax cylinder recorder, and he recorded a common shama. in his backyard in Germany. And the taking out of context, that first bird recording actually it didn't intentionally do it, but it actually set the stage for the ways in which recordings were made after that, trying to capture that singular bird and then putting it away in these huge archives. Well, the problem was, if you lose the context, you lose all the meaning. And you really don't get a sense of why or how or what's causing the bird to vocalize in the way that it is. And so there was Ludwig Koch, there were all the people at Cornell, who Grinnell and so on, in the 1930s and 1940s, who were recording with very elaborate equipment from Hollywood, these recorders that they could take into the field on these horse-drawn wagons or mule-drawn wagons that weighed tons of money, tons of pounds, with lots of batteries and things like that. And they would drag these things into the field to do the various birds. And they began these collections. It was mostly guys, and then they began to compete with one another, to see how many could get these life lists of stuff. There's a whole wonderful history behind that. It's never been written yet, and I hope somebody does it, because I'm not going to do it. But there's a whole history there about why these recordings were made the way that they were, and there's terrific libraries of this material at Cornell and British Library of Wildlife Sound, so on. There are a number of them around. And so I just, at one point I said, better start listening to the whole thing, because that's where the information is.
Wow, fascinating. How about you, Constance? I don't want to be monopolizing, and I know there's a question also that's come in.
A couple of questions, yes. Diane Ballon says, I can't quite believe I am asking Bernie Kraus a question. I have known about you for many years and referred to you as, quote, the god of field recording.
Yeah, hardly that.
When I ask my audio colleagues if they know you, and indeed they do, could you talk about the magic of field recording when you're out there sitting still with headphones, recorder and mic, and you sort of know what to expect, but the magic begins where sounds you may not have anticipated, like hearing those ravens' wings as they fly past you, occurs?
Yeah, well, you never know what to expect in the natural world, because it never occurs the same way twice. Nature is, well, if you want to call it nature, I almost never use the word, but the natural world is always trying to find ways to express itself in the most effective manner and with the least amount of energy expended. So it's always testing, and it's always a constant test from day to day. The dawn chorus is going to be different on Thursday than it was on Wednesday. The bird's going to sing out of this tree or that tree, or lots of birds are going to sing out of different trees at the same time. So you never know what to expect in the natural world, which is what's so glorious about it. Because if you're looking for certainty, the natural world is not the place to find it. If you're as far as why I'm out there sitting, what the magic of recording for me is, it's very personal, actually. It's not scientific, and it has nothing to do with art. It has to do with me personally. I suffer from a terrible case of ADHD. I had this since I was a kid. It got to the point where it was impairing almost everything that I was trying to do. I was dyslexic because of it. I couldn't concentrate. I really had problems in school. And the only thing that has made a difference in my life is taking a recorder and going outside and sitting with headphones, listening to these sounds of the natural world. And it transforms just about my whole attitude about things in listening to these sounds. It's really been therapeutic and helpful in that sense. And so it's been very personal for me. There's a new thing that the Japanese have developed now. It's called forest bathing, Shinrin-yoku, going out in the forest and just listening and being part of the natural world and feeling the air on your skin and smelling those wonderful smells of life and transformation. That's all part of it. But I think it has a great impact on people. It certainly has on me. And I'd like to, encourage people to try that and see how it works for them. And by the way, I've written a new book. It's called The Power of Tranquility in a Very Noisy World. And it speaks just to that issue if you're looking for a way to figure that out. You can get it at the museum, by the way, for those.
That's right. And it is a wonderful book. And I imagine that, I don't know, but I imagine that part of what inspired you to create it, Bernie, was the experience that you went through and finding tranquility after such a harsh, tragic event.
Yeah, it's been really helpful, and where I can't do that in the place where we called Wild Sanctuary any longer, I still have the recordings, and I can listen to the recordings. I create a space for myself to do that.
Right. And there was someone, Leslie Gamble, who shares in your love of spending time in nature and listening and observing through listening, and was saying, I too am hearing the changes and losses of natural voices. Bernie is inspiring me to record the soundscapes I'm encountering. What equipment would you recommend for a first-time soundscape recorder?
Well, you can use this. Start off with your iPhone. I mean, that's a place to start. And it's not going to cost you anything extra to have that. And then you can graduate to things as inexpensive as devices like this. This is a H4n Pro, a Zoom H4n Pro. They're about $200. You can graduate to that level. And these are just fine to use in the field. I use this as my backup device. You can graduate to other things that are far more expensive. I mean, the equipment that I use in the field all the time, if I were to replicate it right now, it would cost me around $7,000. But that's like at the top end now. When I first started and we were using these tape recorders, analog tape recorders, it would be upwards of $15,000 or $20,000, but it's coming way, way down because of the digital technology. And really around $200, you're setting yourself up for some really good material and good recordings and great experiences.
Yeah, that's a big improvement.
Yeah, no, it's at a huge scale of difference.
It occurred to me when you were talking, there have been two episodes in my life that I found moving as far as sound goes, probably more than that, but the absence of human sound in two periods. One, just after 9/11, when the planes stopped, and the other, to some extent, during the COVID pandemic. There were periods outside that were so much more quiet. And I'm curious as to how you felt about those and how you experienced those periods.
All that is written in this book. Last chapter.
That was not planned. That was not a sales pitch.
No, it was excellent. We got to do that again. We don't have to rehearse.
Okay. I'm going to have to buy it now. Thank you.
No, we had people from all over the world writing us about just exactly that experience. My editor at Little Brown was sitting on the fire escape outside his apartment in Brooklyn, having coffee in the morning. And he said, it's the first time, he writes me an email and says, it's the first time I've been sitting outside on my balcony and I haven't heard cars and planes flying over. He said, it's really quiet here. I actually hear birds for the first time. I didn't know they existed.
Huh? Yeah. That's so striking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sally Bradley Golding has a question about how is listening through headphones different from just listening?
Well, when I go out into the field, I bring headphones with me, but I never use them. For one thing, headphones use up about a third of the battery power of your recorder. So you really want to unplug when you could get out there. And I've learned to know my equipment well enough so that I can just plug in and hit record and walk away. And I do that because, for one thing, I don't want to make any noise while I'm recording. And the second thing is, I just want to be away from, I want to see what's going on because I want to notate the activities if there's anything unusual that happens. But also, I just want to hear for myself with my own set of ears, what's happening and what's going on in my world that I've created for myself for those hours, however many I want to spend there. So I never use, I find headphones to be very distracting.
Oh, that's good to know. Right. So even though you're using them to maybe
set up.
set up. Yeah.
Yeah, I set up with them and then I just pull them out and forget it.
Right.
We have a question from a number, there's no name, but it said, would you consider releasing your favorite soundscapes to the public domain so that someone can make access to our various smart speakers? I'm not sure I quite follow that.
Oof, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I've worked really hard on collecting this thing. I've had really, until very recently, almost in my 80s, I've never had any support for this stuff. Mm-hmm. We've done it by mortgaging our house. And, really, it's been a struggle. So I'm not giving anything free to anybody. They want to use this material, they pay for it. And they can license it from us. We are not a free source.
Thank you.
Bernie, I was curious if you could speak a little bit to how you have used your recordings to assess the health of an environment, and that you have some wonderful examples of that in the installation, but just for people who haven't experienced that, which obviously most of the people here won't have, I feel like that's such a breakthrough of
because it was never used for resource management, these soundscapes, because again, people were recording single birds, so they lost all the context. And we're trying to put that back. We're trying to put Humpty Dumpty back together again now by actually recording these habitats where the birds are from. But the problem here in North America is that since 1970, 3 billion birds have been lost in these climate changes and other issues that have occurred because of habitat loss and all kinds of other reasons. So what I'm finding in my archive is a through line here that's showing not only the destruction of these habitats, but also the diminishing of the bird density and diversity, in particular in North America. And we're seeing it everywhere. And I have, oddly enough, I didn't set out to do that. My whole purpose for recording originally, and still mostly now, is recording these habitats and being out there because it makes me feel good. It's very selfish. I just like recording. And so I can't think of anything that makes me feel better, which is why I do it. But as far as, and I'm just finding that it's becoming quieter and quieter with each passing year. A lot of it is drought in Northern California, where I'm doing most of my recording. I'm 83 years old now, and it's getting harder to get in and out of tents. So I'm not spending a lot of time in the field.
Just a follow-up on that, you had that remarkable story of going in and recording after selective logging, which has been thought to be a relatively innocuous way of managing a landscape. And can you just say a little bit about what you discovered in that process?
Sure, and there is an example of that in the exhibit, which you can see. There are actually 4 examples in the exhibit of before and after, or how things are changing in a very rapid sequence. But in Lincoln Meadow is located about a 3.5-hour drive east of San Francisco in the high Sierras at about 6,700 feet. And it's a place that I've been recording for many years through the 80s. In 1988, a logging company tried to convince local residents that there'd be no environmental impact if they went in and did a new protocol called selective logging, taking out a tree here and there. And they said that visually there'd be no change, of course, at all. And the community bought it. They did a really good sales job on it. And so I went in June of 1988 with the logging company's permission and recorded the soundscape before they did the selective logging in June of 1988. Later that summer, they did the selective logging. I went back in 1989 under the same conditions. The winter had been pretty much the same in terms of precipitation and cold, warm ratios. And I recorded in 1989. Well, the difference is profound. To the eye and to the camera, it looks like not a stick or a tree is out of place. It looks exactly the same. But to the ear, because of the selective logging, and I've been back 15 or 16 times since, the biophony is almost gone. It's changed. Just because a few minor changes have been made in that habitat and the trees have been taken out. Why birds have responded in that way that they have, I have no idea, but that was one indicator of something that we have to look at. But we have a number of examples of just that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's really striking hearing those and seeing the spectrogram visualization of that, I think is striking.
Yeah, it was important in this exhibit not to feature graphics of the animals themselves. I really didn't want to do that, and Cartier was also very strong about that, and we agreed that wasn't going to happen in the beginning. The only thing that we're showing is a graphic of the sound, a graphic representation of the sound. So we're only showing things that relate directly to the soundscape. And so you get this streaming spectrogram of how the animals find their niche, their acoustic home within the entire bandwidth of the sound that they can hear. And it's really pretty interesting to see how that all plays out.
Absolutely. And I know we have some more questions on, I just wanted to mention that there's a new documentary about Bernie that we were lucky enough to be able to premiere at the museum. And it's a 37-minute documentary that gives a great overview of the work that led to the creation of the Great Animal Orchestra installation. So if you come to PEM to see the exhibition, make sure that you check that out as well when you're there, because that's every hour from 11 to 3, you can see that. And we're so pleased that came out in time to feature with the exhibition. Constance, did you want to put some of these other questions up?
Yeah, there's one here near and dear to me and probably other bird watchers who are getting older and may have even enjoyed some rock and roll early on, from Jim McDougall. Has your hearing changed? If so, has it changed your appreciation of the soundscapes?
The answer is yes to both. When I've always protected my hearing, because one of the consequences of my ADHD was a hypersensitivity to sound. And so I always protected it. And even when I worked with, as a studio musician with synthesizer, with groups like the Doors that played really, really loud sound, I always protected my ears. That was the first thing that concerned me. So I didn't really, I had almost perfect hearing. I could hear out to 18 kilohertz, which is almost the entire spectrum, until I was 79 years old. And then at 80, things began to change. And one morning I woke up and I'm almost completely deaf in my right ear now for a reason that I don't know, because I never did any, never did firearms or anything like that. And so I just lost my hearing there. I have some hearing in this ear, and I wear hearing aids now. So I have a little trouble when I'm mixing, but I have found some technology that really helps me mix and still capture the things that I need to do.
Has that shifted your experience of listening when you're in the field? Like, how do you relate to that now differently?
Well, I'm pissed off most of the time because I can't hear what I need to hear.
Understood.
Yep.
I don't know what happens is I don't know where the bird song is coming from. I've lost my spatial acuity. And so I hear these birds and I'm looking around and I can't see them like I used to be able to focus in on them. And it's really aggravating.
You are not alone.
Yeah. And for those who are hearing impaired, I mean, there are some really wonderful technologies out there that can help you. And I can attest to that.
Thank goodness, right?
Yeah.
Well, we should probably be wrapping up here, but I know this could go on. There was a question from Robert Neese, who's been recording vocalizations of tricolored blackbirds, which, as you know, nest in dense colonies in the low elevation sites in California. And I'm wondering whether you'd expect differences in the male song from the sites as different as grain fields adjacent to dairies in the San Joaquin Valley, ponds in Monterey County, wetlands in the lower Sacramento Valley, and geographic regions as distant as Baja California and Southeast Washington.
I don't know the answer to that because I haven't really spent time recording them, and you have to really go species by species in order to tell that. I would suspect from the few bird species that I have worked with, that there is some difference in their vocalizations between habitats that they would, nest in. I don't know that, but I'm suspecting that that's true. There's just a guess.
Okay, fair enough. Do you want to do one of these last questions here, Constance?
Yeah. I see a question from Leslie Gamble. I'm teaching a university course on art and climate change this spring. We'll be reading sections of the Great Animal Orchestra and thinking a lot about sound and its expanded capabilities beyond visuality for understanding biophonies and ecology in general. We'll be thinking about expanded temporalities as well. Has Bernie done work with historical soundscapes?
The answer is yes, because all the recordings I have are historic soundscapes. And one of the things that we're trying to do that I emphasize in the film is trying to find an academic home for this archive now, because we want to develop any number of programs based and informed by natural soundscapes, including any of the arts, philosophy, mathematics, computational science, and it goes on forever. Music, certainly. We've identified like 25 different disciplines that are informed by natural soundscapes in one way or another. Literature, for instance. So yeah, it's absolutely germane and critical to our understanding of the world around us. And you have to spend some time listening, that's all.
Leslie also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Janie.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Leslie's also asking if there are any clips of the video installation at PEM available online, because not everybody can get there.
You can see clips. United Visual Artists has a particularly nice, like 5-minute clip of a few of the different segments to give you a feel for what that experience is like. But there's also more material on the PEM webpage for this exhibition, that interviews with Bernie, other clips, and we'll be linking to the microsite that Bernie worked on for the Fondation Cartier that gives you an interactive experience of the different soundscapes, which is really wonderful material, regardless of whether you can get to the exhibition or not. And then she also asks if this is going to be available online, if this program will be, which it will be, both through the ECOC site and through PEM's YouTube channel. So within a week or so, this will be available for people to access. So given that it's after 9 o'clock and on East Coast, Bernie, anyway.
Yeah.
And
I'm hungry.
Yeah, I bet you are. And we could go on forever. So thank you so much for your time on this, and just the extraordinary experience of being able to work with you in the final installation for Great Animal Orchestra, and very grateful to your life's work, really.
Pleasure is all mine, Janie. Appreciate it. So, where are we? Any more questions? We taking any more?
Just appreciation. Yes, people extending their appreciation. And Constance, do you want to sign us off here?
Yes, I just want to say thank you so much. I was very moved by that, and I can't wait to see the installation.
Thank you.
And ECOC members and all, please join us at Members Night again, January 7th. Hope to see you there. Thanks for joining. Good night.
Thanks again, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you, Janie. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.